There is an old Hermetic principle that goes like this: as above, so below. But few people consider that this phrase describes not a static picture of the world, but two countercurrents of knowledge. Humanity looks at reality with two different eyes. One eye is science. It looks from the bottom up. The second eye is magic, or ancient esoteric knowledge. It looks from the top down. We are used to thinking that these are opposites, that a scientist in a white coat and a priest in a temple will never find common ground. But today, in the 21st century, something incredible is happening. These two beams of light are beginning to intersect. And their point of intersection is located where previously only philosophers and mystics dwelt, in the understanding of the nature of consciousness and its connection to matter. And to understand why this meeting is inevitable, let's first look at how each of these paths moves. Science in its classical, Newtonian sense is the great archaeologist of reality. It begins its journey from the very bottom, with gross, tangible matter. A scientist takes a stone, breaks it with a hammer, grinds it into dust, examines it under a microscope. He sees a crystal lattice. He goes deeper, he sees molecules and atoms. Even deeper, nuclei, protons, neutrons, electrons. And then, in particle accelerators, he breaks even protons into quarks and gluons. This path is an ascent up the ladder of facts. Every step must be verified by experiment. This is induction. We collect thousands of fragments of information to put together a mosaic of the unified law. And the scientist believes that if he disassembles the world into the smallest details, he will understand the Creator's design. From matter to energy, from energy to mathematical equations, from equations to understanding the structure of the universe. This is knowledge through analysis, through dissecting the whole into parts. But in the 20th century, science hit a strange ceiling. Scientists reached the bottom and discovered that there is no bottom. There, at the level of the Planck length, where the usual laws of gravity and spacetime cease to work, matter disappears. Instead of solid balls, there was an ocean of bubbling probabilities, quantum fluctuations, and fields. At the bottom, there is no longer substance. At the bottom, there is only information and potential. And here, science, without wanting to, found itself face to face with what those who look from the top down have always talked about. Magic, or more broadly, the esoteric tradition, has always gone the opposite way. It does not study the structure of an already finished mechanism, it tries to understand how this mechanism was conceived. For the magician or mystic, the idea is primary. In the beginning was the word, the logos, the intent. And already this intent, vibrating and condensing, gave birth to light, stars, planets, and, finally, dense matter. This is deduction from the first principle. The magician works with symbols, rituals, and states of consciousness because he believes in the law of similarity. If the world was created by the thought of the Creator, then the thought of man, being correctly tuned and purified, is capable of making changes in the fabric of reality. This is knowledge through synthesis. If science asks, how is it arranged, then magic asks, what role does it play in the plan? For a long time, science considered this path unscientific and subjective. And indeed, the magician could not provide a reproducible protocol for a miracle. The result always depended on the personality of the operator, on the state of his spirit, on that very inner concentration and effort of will, which in the tradition are passed directly from teacher to student. But in this seeming disadvantage lay the deepest knowledge that the observer is inseparable from the observed. And here, at the point where matter turns into probability, the paths of science and magic began to close like a giant Uroboros snake biting its tail. However, do not think that magic is only groundless fantasies or blind faith. Just as science for centuries accumulated empirical experience, setting experiments with magnets and electric eels, not fully understanding the nature of electricity, magic for centuries accumulated its own database. And one of the most vivid and illustrative examples of such accumulation is the ancient rituals of purification and diagnostics associated with casting wax or lead. Recall this picture: over a person's head or over a sore spot, wax is melted and poured into cold water. Or in some traditions, heavy molten lead is used. We cannot yet, from the position of strict science, explain the molecular mechanism of why this works. We do not have an equation that would link the melting point of paraffin with the patient's anxiety level. But we have thousands, tens of thousands of testimonies that this ritual leads to a concrete result. Anxiety goes away, illness recedes, the evil eye, as people say, is removed. And moreover, the wax figure frozen in the water or the lead blob is not just a random pattern. An experienced sorceress or healer reads information about a person's state from these forms. She sees their images of fears, figures of people who may have wished harm, or symbols of future events. For a modern skeptic, this is pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see faces in clouds. But for a practitioner, this is a diagnostic map. And here lies the most interesting part. In rituals, we still cannot with absolute precision separate the wheat from the chaff. What exactly works in this ritual? The chemical composition of the wax. The special structure of the water that remembers information. The placebo effect, which raises the body's internal reserves. Or is there really some kind of quantum exchange of information between the person's biofield and the molten substance? But there is also another layer that cannot be ignored and that categorically does not fit into a purely mechanistic picture of the world. This is the power of the operator himself. The one who performs the ritual. Let's be honest, if an ordinary person, a random passerby, simply mechanically repeats all the actions, melts the wax, pours it into the water, mutters the words he heard somewhere, most likely, nothing will work for him. There will be no diagnostic picture on the wax, nor relief for the one for whom it is done. Because a ritual is not just a set of instructions for assembling furniture from a supermarket. A certain interaction must arise between a person and a ritual. A person must enter a special state, tune in a certain way. In different traditions, this is called differently: raising power, opening a channel, entering the flow, achieving the desired vibration. The essence is the same. The operator does not just perform actions with his hands, he puts something into them for which we do not yet have an exact scientific name. This is a kind of inner energy, a volitional impulse, a special concentration of consciousness, the nature of which we are only beginning to study, and even then mainly in laboratories exploring meditation and altered states of consciousness. And it is this variable, the presence or absence of power in the operator, as well as the quality of his interaction with the ritual, that makes magic so difficult for laboratory repetition. We cannot put power in a test tube. We cannot measure it with a voltmeter. But we see its manifestations. Just as in quantum physics we cannot see the wave function itself, but we see the results of its collapse. Magic through the centuries of its existence has crystallized the understanding that a person in a ritual is not a passive executor, but an active co-author of the process. And if you remove the person, remove his living, trembling, specially tuned consciousness, then only an empty theatrical decoration will remain, incapable of producing any change in the fabric of being. We don't know the exact answer. But just as the alchemists didn't know why their elixirs sometimes healed and sometimes killed, they simply recorded recurring connections. If you do this and are in such a state of spirit, then it will turn out like this. And gradually, for centuries, by trial and error, the theory of magic began to crystallize from these practices. Not as a collection of spells, but as a tool for knowing the world. This is knowledge from the top down, but at the same time it relies on its own, inner reproducibility. If a ritual with wax casting relieves pain in 8 people out of 10 in different villages, but only on the condition that it is performed by a person who has a certain gift or training, then some objective pattern is hidden in this interaction of the operator and the ritual. We just haven't grown to a device that can measure this pattern. The key to this meeting lies in perhaps the most dramatic and misunderstood phenomenon of quantum physics, in the observer problem. We are used to thinking that we just look at the world. The world exists on its own, and we only photograph it with our eyes. It turned out that this is not so. The famous double-slit experiment showed that an electron, as long as no one is looking at it, behaves like a wave. It is like a ghost, passing through both slits at the same time. But when a detector is placed, when an active measurement is introduced into the system, the wave instantly collapses into a point, and the electron becomes a particle. The way we look determines what we see. Physicists called this the collapse of the wave function. And mystics of all times called it the power of intent. The great John Archibald Wheeler, one of the fathers of quantum theory, formulated this as the participatory anthropic principle. He said, "We are not just spectators in the theater of the universe, we are co-authors of the play that is played out on the stage of spacetime." Reality, in essence, is not completed until a glance possessing consciousness falls upon it. And now let's move to another laboratory where quantum entanglement is being studied. Two particles fly apart to a distance of billions of light years. And suddenly we change the state of one of them. At that very moment, instantly, faster than the speed of light, the state of the second one changes. For Einstein, this was spooky action at a distance, impossible in his picture of the world. For a magician or a shaman, this is the law of universal unity, where everything is connected with everything, and neither distance nor time are obstacles for an information signal. The scientific world is now looking for a theory of everything that would unite everything into a single field. Esotericists thousands of years ago called this field the Akashic Records. And here we come to the most subtle and important point. To where it is necessary to separate the wheat from the chaff. When we say that science has met magic, many imagine a scene from a cheap movie. A person frowns, looks at a pencil, and the pencil rolls across the table. This is a mistake. A deep, fundamental mistake in understanding how the interaction of consciousness and matter works. Thought is immaterial. And this is not a metaphor, it is a fact. Thought has no rest mass, it has no electric charge, it does not create a Newtonian force F equals m times a. If you sit across from a cup and fiercely desire it to move a centimeter to the right, you can sit like that for the rest of your life. The cup will remain in place because in the physical world a push is needed for its movement. And thought is not a push. But then where is the magic? Magic is that thought is capable of building a chain of events. It doesn't push the object directly, it changes the probability field around this object and around yourself. Imagine that you need a certain important document to be not in your desk, but in the hands of another person in another part of the city. If you just sit and think about it, the document will remain in the desk. But if this thought is firmly rooted in your consciousness, it begins to act as a perception filter. Your brain, or rather the reticular formation, begins to scan the noise of reality differently. You begin to notice what you didn't notice before. You leave the house a little earlier because you felt a vague concern. You turn your head a little differently at the intersection. Your step becomes a split second faster. These are microscopic changes. They are invisible to you and to others. But in a complex, nonlinear system called a city or society, this microscopic difference is enough to trigger the butterfly effect. As a result, you bump into a colleague at the door who says, "Oh, I just wanted to stop by for that document, let me take it myself, I'm passing by anyway." A passerby you don't even know becomes an agent of your will. He passes by, acts on the object, and moves it from point A to point B. For an outside observer, this is pure coincidence. Chance. But for a person who kept an intention in mind, this is a shift in reality. This is the very synchronicity that psychologist Carl Gustav Jung and Nobel Prize winner in physics Wolfgang Pauli wrote about. They introduced the concept of an acausal connection. This is when events are connected not by cause and effect, not by a billiard ball hitting another ball, but by a single meaning. Reality does not violate the law of conservation of energy. It does not allow thought to be a hammer. But it allows thought to be an architectural plan. And the very fabric of being responds to this plan, finding the right people and the right circumstances to embody the drawing in stone. And now, when we have seen how these two streams are moving towards each other, it is important to realize one more thing that unites them much more than is commonly believed. Both science and magic are living, breathing systems of knowledge. They are not static sets of dogmas carved in granite for all eternity. He who thinks that science is something static, unshakable, and final is mistaken. Let's face the truth. The history of science is largely a history of delusions that in their time were considered the ultimate truth. What yesterday was the gold standard, an indisputable postulate, today can be questioned, and tomorrow even sent to the dustbin of history as harmful and useless. In medicine, this is especially vivid. Recall bloodletting, which for centuries was considered a panacea for all diseases. Recall lobotomy, for which they even gave the Nobel Prize, and decades later it was recognized as barbarism, crippling people. Recall thalidomide, radium in toothpaste, cocaine as a cough remedy for children. All this at the time of its application had a scientific basis and the approval of the best minds of the era. Even now, in the 21st century, what we call evidence-based medicine and the gold standard of treatment, in 50 or 100 years, may be recognized not just as erroneous, but as harmful. And that's okay. This is the strength of science, not in its infallibility, but in its ability to self-correct. Science, despite all its conservatism, all its desire to maintain the status quo and protect existing paradigms, still transforms under the pressure of new facts. Old theories collapse under the weight of anomalies, and new, more precise models of reality grow on their ruins. The approach to understanding the world is constantly evolving. And what science does not recognize today does not mean that it will not be forced to recognize it tomorrow when new tools and new methods of measurement appear. And you know what? Exactly the same process is happening in magic. Yes, in magical traditions a huge amount of superstition, prejudice, outright fiction, and theatrical effects calculated for an impressionable public are mixed. For centuries, a husk of empty rituals and meaningless actions has grown around real knowledge. But just as in alchemy, which seemed to be a fruitless fuss with retorts, over time a strict science emerged, chemistry, so in magic there is a slow but inexorable process of separating the wheat from the chaff. Gradually, step by step, practices that do not give results are weeded out. What works only in the operator's imagination but does not change reality is forgotten. And what leads to concrete, albeit difficult to explain results, wax casting, working with intent, certain meditative states, remains in the arsenal and is passed on. From this millennial empirical experience, a clean structure, a clean theory of magic, is slowly beginning to be built. A theory that, perhaps, our descendants will already be able to apply in practice not as a secret art for the chosen ones, but as a clear and reproducible technology of interaction between consciousness and the fabric of being. And in this striving for purification, to the rejection of dead dogmas and to the search for a functioning grain of truth, science and magic again turn out to be surprisingly similar. Both of them are not monuments to the past, but living rivers of knowledge that flow, wind, sometimes go underground, but always strive for the same ocean of understanding. That is why real, deep magic has never been the art of a frontal blow to reality. It's the art of tuning. This is the ability to stretch the string of your consciousness in unison with the vibrations of the universe so that resonance arises. Science, having gone the path from stone to quark, found out that a quark is not a thing, but a vibration of a string or a cluster of information. And magic has always claimed that information is primary. It is here that the paths finally meet. The Uroboros dragon closes its mouth on its tail. Science, which went from the bottom up, and magic, which went from the top down, met at the same point, at the point of recognition that consciousness and matter are inseparable. They are not two different substances, but two poles of one magnet. We are on the threshold of a new era where technology will become magical and magic will become clear technology. Where meditation will be considered not as a way to relax, but as an exact protocol for coherent tuning of neural networks, capable of influencing the quantum probabilities of the surrounding world. And where an old grandmother's ritual with wax casting will perhaps receive its explanation through the prism of interaction between biopolymer structures and liquid crystals, their informational memory and, most importantly, through the prism of the power of the one who holds the ladle with molten wax in his hands. And I want to finish this conversation with a simple but great thought. We are used to considering ourselves small cogs in a huge soulless machine of the cosmos. But the meeting of science and magic tells us the opposite. It says that each of us is not just an observer. Each of us is a participant in creation. And our thought, not being a sledgehammer, is capable of being the thinnest chisel with which we carve out our destiny and the destiny of the world around us day after day.